How is the family taking the events of your father's delicate and often critical condition?
Well, as anyone who's been through it, who's had an extended sickness in the family will probably understand. It's quite nerve-wracking. It's an emotional roller coaster. But as we are all wont to do, we get more and more used to it. I suppose we're handling it better now than we were before. It's never easy, but we're still here.
Well, what can you say about your father's steadfast decision to return to the Philippines, given his present health condition and the persistent rejection of all your appeals by the Cory government? Do you still think it is a good decision?
Oh yes, certainly. There are no good reasons for us to stay here. The very basic fundamental question is whether or not we belong here. We do not. Home is in the Philippines, not here. Secondly, we have been accused of all kinds of terrible crimes, and we have been accused of all kinds of terrible misbehavior. And the place to answer that is in front of the Filipino people, not in front of the American media, not in front of the American public, not in front of the American political system, but in the Philippines. And certainly it was a good decision. As a matter of fact, I don't even think there was a decision that had to be made. It was almost a given.
Mm-hmm. If you were your father, would your decision be exactly the same, or would you do certain things differently?
Certainly the question as to whether or not one should return home is not really a question any longer. To go home, certainly, yes. Do things differently? Who knows? It's very hard to say. I wouldn't be one to second guess him, but perhaps we see things in a different light now than we did 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Has the family discussed any plans in the event of the inevitable happening, God forbid, to your father?
Oh, certainly, yes. Of course, all the practical considerations have been discussed, and all the practical plans as to the disposition of there's no other way to put it, the disposition of the family certainly have been discussed, and I suppose we have a pretty good idea what to do. But this is the whole problem. The powers that be in the United States will determine what we can and cannot do. And although we may want to do certain things, we may not be allowed to do so. I mean, just as an example, my parents are not allowed to leave the island of Oahu, which is not up to us. It's no decision of ours. It's the American government doing what they feel the Philippine government wants them to do. And so long as we stay here, those sort of constraints will continue. And which brings us back to the reason why we must go home.
Mm-hmm. As the only Marcos son, and as the man bearing the name Ferdinand Marcos, do you think of pursuing your political career and taking up the cudgels for the Filipino people where your father has left off?
Well, you know, the only way I can answer that question is really to give you a general idea of where my priorities lie. As I mentioned before, obviously there have been many accusations leveled against the family, and all those have to be answered. Secondly, the family cannot be allowed to just exist or just survive within the political milieu in the Philippines. There must be an element of self-determination in terms of our lives. And certainly we will work towards that, i.e. the legal questions must be resolved. The legal accusations must be answered. We must be able to live a life that is dignified and honorable. And it's a simple wish, but it seems to be something that they're not willing to give us, and therefore I will do everything I can to achieve that. As to a political career, well, it would seem that most of the time one finds oneself in a political career because of something that one believes in. Considering what has happened in the last 3 years, it would seem that is the sort of direction that one would inevitably take. I would certainly champion any cause that would try and right any injustice in the Philippines. If there's one thing the old man has instilled, I think, in all of us children, is a great nationalism and a great desire for equality and egalitarianism in the country. And should anything stand in the way of that, I will certainly work against it. If that takes a political identity, then so be it. I think that's actually getting ahead of ourselves, because simply the problems of the family are enormous and must be reckoned with before any of this sort of thing can be dealt with.